A truck can look like freedom from the outside. Your name on the lease, your hands on the wheel. A promise that you are no longer just a company driver. You are building something. But inside some lease purchase systems, the label changes faster than the reality does. Same terminals, same dispatch pressure, same carrier control systems. Only now, the fuel, the insurance, the truck payment, the waiting time, and the downside all belong to you. Tonight on the Tread and Truth podcast, we're looking at my story inside the Knight Swift Contractor system. From employee driver to lease purchase contractor to a dispute involving fuel discounts, fixed deductions, mismatched paperwork, and a legal fight where procedure became its own toll booth. This episode is about the part of trucking the recruiting ads do not explain, the nickel fuel discount versus the real fuel economics, the unpaid waiting, the low-mile weeks, the contract terms that do not line up. And the moment you realize independent might mean independent risk, not independent control. This is a story about numbers, structure, and accountability. Because if drivers are expected to carry the cost, they deserve to see the math. You're listening to the Tread and Truth podcast.
Imagine pulling up to a diesel pump, right? You fill your tank, and the cashier hands you a discount for, I don't know, like $6.
I mean, hey, sounds nice. It's a nice little perk to the job.
Yeah, exactly. But what if I told you that while you pocketed those $6, the massive corporation you work for quietly pocketed almost $80 on that exact same transaction?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a huge difference.
Right. And what if that mathematical sleight of hand ended up costing you upwards of $30,000 a year?
That is just a phenomenal hidden mechanism. It really is.
It's wild. So welcome to the deep dive. For you listening today, we are taking you on a profoundly detailed, super granular journey into the machinery of the modern commercial trucking industry.
Yeah, we are unpacking a firsthand, highly documented account from a veteran truck driver.
Yep, it's all from a comprehensive post on uknight.org. It was written by a former driver for Knight Refrigerated.
And, they documented their entire life cycle of transitioning from a standard company employee to a quote-unquote independent contractor under a commercial lease purchase agreement.
And the financial math and the legal structures we're about to unpack, I mean, they go way beyond standard corporate profit margins.
Oh, absolutely. They fundamentally reshape how we understand the independent contractor model.
Yeah, and this isn't just a theoretical complaint, right? This specific account actually culminated in a lawsuit filed in Maricopa County Superior Court.
Right, case number CV 2024-019709.
Exactly. And the driver's docket names several corporate entities, including Knight Transportation, Inc., Knight Refrigerated, LLC, and Quad K, LLC.
Now, before we dive into the mechanics of all this, we really need to establish some ground rules for you, the listener.
Yeah, definitely.
So throughout this discussion, we're going to be explicitly detailing this driver's specific experiences, right? We'll be unpacking their financial math and outlining their allegations against Knight Transportation and its affiliated entities.
Right. But our role here is just to impartially report on the structures, the contracts, and the mathematics presented in the source document.
Exactly. We are not acting as judge or jury here. We aren't taking legal sides in this dispute.
Yeah, no sides. Our goal is just to use this highly detailed, real-world case study to educate you on how the structural mechanics of these lease purchase contracts actually work.
So whether you are a driver considering one of these programs or someone fascinated by supply chain logistics,
or just a person who wants to understand how modern gig economy contracts actually function behind the scenes, because this is basically a masterclass in reading the fine print.
it really is.
We're going to look at the very real legal danger of having mismatched paperwork, unpack the procedural fog of civil litigation, and break down dollar by dollar what it truly costs to sign a piece of paper that promises you get to be your own boss.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the glossy recruitment brochures and how they collide with the day-to-day reality of the lease purchase pipeline.
So, the author of our source material notes that they began working at Knight as a standard employee driver in June of 2021.
Okay.
But by December of 2021, they made a transition over to the independent contractor side of the business under a lease-to-own setup.
Gotcha.
And to understand why someone makes that jump, we have to um, kind of look at the broader context of the trucking industry.
Right, the history of it.
Yeah. Decades ago, prior to deregulation in the 1980s, driving a truck was almost exclusively a standard, unionized, employee-based career.
So the carrier owned the trucks, paid for the fuel, absorbed the maintenance costs, all of it.
Exactly. They carried all the capital risk.
But the modern model has shifted significantly toward offloading that capital risk, hasn't it?
Oh, massively.
Because the recruiter pitch sounds like the classic American dream. I mean, you go from being a wage-earning employee to an independent business owner.
Right. You're leasing to own this massive, powerful piece of commercial equipment.
Yeah, and the brochure sells freedom, independence, and like this idea that your earning potential is completely uncapped.
Because you're the master of your own destiny.
Exactly. But it's an incredibly compelling pitch.
It is. But the driver immediately points out a massive paradox here, what we can call the paradox of operations versus finance.
Explain that a bit more.
So the driver states that the moment they became a contractor, the day-to-day operational reality on the ground did not change one bit.
Wait, really? Not at all.
Nope. They were driving the exact same truck. They were parking at the exact same company terminals.
Oh, wow.
They were interacting with the exact same chain of command and dispatchers. The carrier still completely controlled all the operational levers of the business.
So operationally, they are treated indistinguishably from a W-2 company employee.
Basically, yes.
They are told where to go, when to be there, and how to operate within the carrier's closed ecosystem.
Right. But financially, the entire universe just flipped upside down.
Right, because everything that used to be a company cost suddenly transformed into a personal, quote-unquote, contractor deduction.
Exactly. When you are a company driver, the company pays for the diesel fuel.
Sure.
The company pays for the oil changes, tires, mechanical breakdowns. They absorb the fixed overhead of the asset itself.
Yeah.
But the moment you sign that lease purchase agreement, the financial risk transfers entirely to you.
The fuel comes directly out of your weekly settlement checks.
Yep. The fixed lease expenses are now your personal liability.
Man, that's heavy.
And the critical friction point highlighted in the source is that while the driver took on 100% of the financial risk, the carrier maintained total control over the systems that determined how much revenue the driver could generate.
That is just a staggering structural imbalance.
It really is.
Like, if I control your revenue stream, meaning I control the dispatch system, I control which loads you get, and I control the rates, but you are fully responsible for all the costs.
Right. Then I've effectively insulated myself from market downturns.
Exactly. The source document describes a specific, agonizing phenomenon that illustrates this imbalance perfectly. They call it the terminal trap.
Ah, the terminal trap. Yeah, this exposes the fundamental difference between how an employee is compensated versus an independent contractor with heavy fixed lease obligations.
Right.
As an employee driver, if dispatch tells you to sit and wait at a terminal because freight is slow, you might be frustrated that you aren't making mileage pay. Right.
Sure, yeah.
But you aren't actively losing money out of your own pocket just to keep the truck existing.
But for this lease purchase driver, the reality of waiting is financially brutal.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
You do not get paid for downtime.
Right. Whether you are sitting at a company terminal, parked at a crowded truck stop, or sitting for 6 hours at a shipper's loading dock waiting for a forklift driver.
You generate absolutely zero revenue while the wheels aren't turning.
However, the clock on your fixed costs never, ever stops ticking.
Nope. The lease payment for the truck, the commercial insurance premiums, the administrative deductions, those are calculated weekly, and they run on a continuous loop.
They don't pause just because the dispatch board is empty. And the source gives a deeply visceral example of what this looks like in practice. Like, picture the summer months.
Oh yeah, this part was rough.
You are in a semi-truck parked on an asphalt lot out in the baking sun. You are stuck waiting for a load.
And you can't just turn the truck off and sit there.
No. Or you will, as the author explicitly states, boil alive in the cab.
Because the temperatures inside a metal cab in the summer can easily exceed 120 degrees.
So you have to idle the truck's engine to keep the air conditioning running.
Right. And let's look at the microscopic financial picture of that specific moment.
Okay.
A heavy-duty diesel engine burns roughly 1 gallon of fuel per hour while idling.
Okay, so you are sitting perfectly still, generating zero revenue.
Yep. Your daily portion of the truck lease payment is still being deducted. Your daily insurance premium is being deducted.
And you are actively burning expensive diesel fuel-like money straight out of your pocket just to survive the ambient temperature in the cab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're experiencing a massive negative cash flow event before the truck is even dispatched.
I was trying to conceptualize how this imbalance actually sustains itself. It's almost like renting a storefront in a major shopping mall.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. How so?
Well, you sign a massive lease agreement to be an independent retailer, right?
Right.
But the mall landlord dictates your exact operating hours. The landlord completely controls your cash register and pricing system.
Okay.
They decide what products you are allowed to put on your shelves. You have absolutely no control over the marketing or foot traffic.
Right. You're locked in.
And if no customers walk into your store all week, you still owe the landlord the thousands of dollars in rent for the space.
Exactly.
If the landlord fails to drive traffic, you go bankrupt, but the landlord still collects the rent from your security deposit until you're completely drained.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. The carrier suffers virtually no penalty for operational inefficiency.
Wow.
Like, if a carrier has too many trucks and a shortage of freight, an employee-based fleet costs them a fortune in idle, depreciating assets and base pay.
But in a lease-purchase fleet, if the contractor is paying the lease and the insurance, the carrier's financial exposure to that inefficiency is massively reduced.
Right, the contractor bears the entire burden of the downtime.
But wait, if the carrier controls dispatch, why would they intentionally run a driver low on miles? Wouldn't the carrier want the truck moving so they make money on the freight?
Well, I mean, that is the logical assumption, right? But it ignores the macro fleet dynamics.
What do you mean?
Carriers are managing vast networks of hundreds or thousands of trucks. Their priority is covering their freight commitments to shippers.
Okay, so they need coverage.
Exactly, which often means keeping excess capacity like extra trucks available in certain regions just in case a surge happens.
Oh, I see.
If those extra trucks are employee trucks, it's expensive overhead. If those extra trucks are lease purchase contractors, it's essentially free standby inventory for the carrier.
Wow. So the carrier still makes their margin when the truck finally moves, but they don't bleed capital while it sits. Which means the operational lever of control directly feeds into the first major financial trap. Let's look at the illusion of mileage and the reality of the fixed cost squeeze.
Yeah, in the source document, the author contrasts their reality under the Knight Lease-Purchase system with their current reality as a truly independent owner-operator operating outside of a carrier-controlled lease.
And the operational contrast is pretty stark, right?
Very stark. Under the Knight system, they reported running what they called a pathetic 1,500 to 2,200 miles per week.
Okay, but now?
Now, operating as a true independent, they are consistently running 3,000 to 3,500 miles per week.
We are talking about basically double the productivity.
Yep.
And the author specifically notes that difference isn't pride, it's survival.
It is absolute survival, and it's because of the mathematical reality of fixed costs.
Right.
Running 1,500 miles a week in a lease purchase program is essentially a slow financial death sentence. The driver suffers a double punishment when they are held to low miles.
Let's break that down. The first punishment is obvious. I mean, you earn less top-line revenue because you simply aren't moving the freight.
Right, exactly.
But the second punishment is the silent killer. Your massive fixed costs, like the truck lease, the insurance, the accounting fees, they remain exactly the same whether you drive 1 mile or 3,000 miles.
Yes, meaning those fixed costs have to be spread across fewer miles, which causes your effective cost per mile to just skyrocket.
Let's run a hypothetical to make that concrete for you listening.
Okay, let's say your fixed truck payment and insurance total $1,000 a week,
Okay, $1,000.
and you drive 3,000 miles. Those fixed costs represent about 33 cents for every mile you drive.
So you have to earn 33 cents a mile just to pay for the existence of the truck?
Right. But if dispatch only gives you 1,000 miles that week, that exact same $1,000 fixed cost is now costing you a full dollar for every single mile you drive.
Wow. Your operating margin just evaporated before you even bought fuel.
Exactly.
And it gets so much worse when you look at how the pay itself is calculated.
Oh yes, Addendum D.
Right. The source provided specific details on their base contract rate schedule, specifically referring to Addendum D. The pay wasn't a flat rate across the board.
No, it was a tiered loaded mile system, meaning the cents per mile dropped depending on the length of the trip.
So the author lays out the numbers for their refrigerated loads. If a trip was between 1 and 275 loaded miles, the pay was $1.55 per mile.
So,
If the trip was between 276 and 550 miles, the pay dropped to $1.31 per mile.
and for any long-haul trip of 551 miles or over, the pay dropped all the way down to $1.19 per mile.
Man, I see where this is going. This tiered structure essentially acts as a cap on earning potential.
That's exactly what it is.
Because shorter trips naturally involve significantly more unpaid time, right?
Much more. More time navigating local traffic to get to shippers, more time backing into loading docks, more time waiting for the trailer to be loaded or unloaded.
So that higher rate of $1.55 on a short trip is almost entirely consumed by the massive unpaid downtime surrounding it.
Precisely. And when you finally get a long run like a route where you can actually put the truck on the interstate, set the cruise control, and efficiently rack up miles, the carrier significantly reduces your pay per mile down to $1.19.
Wow. It ensures that your margin remains tightly compressed regardless of the operational scenario.
Yep. But there is another trap hidden inside the mileage calculation itself.
Oh, something the source brings up that just blew my mind.
It's wild. The driver explicitly states that they were not paid on the actual physical miles the truck's odometer recorded.
Wait, really? What were they paid on?
They were paid on something called bureau miles or Rand-McNally mile.
Tariff mile.
Exactly. This is a deeply entrenched practice in the commercial freight industry, and it's critical to understand.
Okay, break it down.
When a carrier quotes a rate to a shipper and subsequently pays a driver, they use routing software that calculates the distance between point A and point B using standardized highway routing.
Right.
This software establishes the official bureau miles for the trip.
But out in the real world, a 70,000-pound semi-truck doesn't operate in a theoretical software vacuum.
Exactly the opposite. A driver might face severe weather reroutes. They might encounter a highway closure due to an accident.
Or they might have to take, a 20-mile detour around a mountain pass that restricts hazardous materials or certain weights.
Right. Or very commonly, they arrive near their delivery point and have to drive an extra 15 miles out of route just to find a safe, legal place to park the truck for their mandatory, federally regulated rest break.
So let me get this straight. If the software's bureau miles dictate the trip is 500 miles, but due to a massive highway closure and a search for parking, the driver actually has to drive 560 physical miles to legally and safely deliver the freight.
Yeah.
The driver does not get paid for those extra 60 miles.
The driver receives zero revenue for those extra 60 miles.
That's insane.
However, the driver still pays for the diesel fuel burned during those 60 miles.
Unbelievable.
The driver absorbs the mechanical wear and tear on the leased asset for those 60 miles. It is another lever where the carrier defines the theoretical reality for revenue, while the driver absorbs the physical reality of the cost.
Just think about the psychological toll of this daily struggle. You are out there on the road, hundreds of miles from your family, sleeping in a metal box.
Yeah, it's hard life.
The broader economy is experiencing inflation, the cost of food at the truck stops is skyrocketing, but you are locked into these fixed, stale contract rates.
And the source mentions that an owner-ops manager even admitted to them verbally that they knew they needed to raise the cents per mile pay.
But acknowledging it doesn't change the contract.
Exactly. The independent contractor in this model absorbs all the market volatility on the cost side, but gets none of the upside on the revenue side.
Right, so in a booming freight market where spot rates are high, their pay stays locked at $1.19 a mile.
Their rates are fixed, but they bear all the downside risk of downtime, operational delays, and actual mileage discrepancies.
It completely defeats the entire premise of being an independent business owner.
Completely. And the author notes that in their current, true independent status, they are paid on a percentage of the load's gross revenue.
Ah, okay.
So when market rates rise, their income rises organically. Their incentives are completely aligned with the market.
But under the lease-purchase addendum, their pay was completely divorced from real-time market dynamics.
Which brings us to the most astonishing financial breakdown in the entire source document.
Yes. We need to pivot from how drivers are compensated for the miles they drive to how they are charged for the fuel they're required to burn.
This is huge.
I want everyone listening to visualize these numbers because the math we're about to unpack is the exact reason why a business model like this can be incredibly lucrative for the corporation while systematically draining the contractor.
We are talking about the massive chasm between what is marketed to drivers as a nickel discount versus the true hidden savings of market network fuel pricing.
Right. And the source material is fantastic here because it moves away from general complaints and provides indisputable hard mathematics.
Yeah, they provided a literal receipt from a Love's travel stop in Waddy, Kentucky.
So specific.
Very specific. They used this receipt to demonstrate what a true modern fuel network discount looks like for a real independent owner-operator today who has direct access to fleet pricing.
Okay, let's walk through the numbers on that Waddy, Kentucky receipt for you.
Okay.
The retail price of the diesel fuel-like, the price advertised on the massive sign outside the truck stop, was 5.0899 per gallon.
That's right.
However, because the driver now operates independently and has access to a true network discount program, their actual price paid at the pump was $4.387 per gallon.
The math there is pretty straightforward but profound. The drivers save roughly 70 cents, specifically 0.702 cents on every single gallon they pumped.
So on this specific stop, the driver pumped 119.9 gallons of diesel.
Right.
If you multiply that volume by their 70-cent real discount, the total cash discount they received at the register was $84.16.
That is $84 of real money that stayed directly in the driver's pocket on a single stop.
Now, we must compare that real-world economic reality to what was marketed to the driver when they were trapped in the lease-purchase system at Knight.
Yes, the source refers to the carrier's program as the famous nickel discount,
The famous nickel discount.
meaning the carrier's contract stipulated they would pass along a discount of 5 cents per gallon to the driver.
Okay, let's apply that famous nickel discount to the exact same fill-up.
Okay, let's do the math.
119.9 gallons multiplied by 5 cents per gallon yields a total discount of exactly $5.99.
Let's just round it to $6.
Right, a $6 discount versus an $84 discount.
The difference, the missing money on that single everyday stop to get fuel is roughly $78.
That sounds like a lot for one tank of gas, but we really need to synthesize the annual impact of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. In the commercial trucking industry, fuel volume is massive. It is the single largest variable expense.
The driver states their truck averaged about 7 miles per gallon.
And as we established, a hard-running independent can drive up to 3,500 miles a week.
So 3,500 miles divided by an average of 7 miles per gallon means the truck is consuming roughly 500 gallons of diesel every single week.
Let's run the spread on 500 gallons a week.
Okay.
If you are stuck inside the lease purchase program with the marketed nickel discount, 500 gallons times 5 cents saves you $25 a week.
But if you have access to the true 70-cent network discount that exists in the market, 500 gallons times 70 cents saves you $350 a week.
So $350 minus $25. That is a spread, a hidden gap of $325 per week.
Wow. And if you multiply that out over a 52-week year, that gap is roughly $16,900 a year.
Almost $17,000.
And the author makes a point to note that this is just an average scenario based on moderate pricing.
Right, they bring up what they call the Big East Coast scenario.
Oh, yeah. Explain them.
In certain regions, particularly the Northeast, the retail markups at the pump are astronomically high compared to the wholesale rack rate. In those areas, the true network discounts can be as high as $2 per gallon.
Man, let's do that math because it's staggering. A $2 network discount minus the 5 cents credited to the driver means a spread of $1.95 per gallon.
Yep.
At 500 gallons a week, 500 times $1.95 is $975 a week in hidden spread.
It's wild. Over a 52-week year, that hidden gap jumps to over $50,000.
Now, the driver conservatively estimated the gap at nearly $31,800 a year based on the lower night mileage of around 300 gallons a week. But regardless of the specific mileage, we are talking about tens of thousands of dollars.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of this entire fuel discussion. Where does that massive spread of money actually go?
Right. If the truck stop is willing to sell the fuel for 70 cents less based on fleet volume, but the driver paying for the fuel is only seeing 5 cents of that savings, who is pocketing the other 65 cents per gallon?
Well, the source document is very careful and precise here. The author notes that they cannot see the carrier's actual internal account level pricing without a legal subpoena for their corporate records.
Right, of course.
However, they explain the fundamental mechanics of how fleet fuel networks like EFS, Comdata, or direct accounts with Pilot, Flying J, and Loves actually operate.
Okay, how do they work?
When a massive carrier with thousands of trucks sets up a master fuel account, the real pricing economics, the volume rebates, and the back-end financial incentives flow directly to the master account holder.
Which means the massive corporate entity gets the true network price.
Exactly. The contractor, the driver who is actually paying the retail price for the fuel out of their settlement, is only credited a fixed 5-cent discount on their statement.
So the entirety of that massive spread between the true wholesale discount and the 5-cent credit accrues to the master account holder, the carrier, unless the carrier transparently passes it through.
Right. In plain English, if the fuel account is in the company's name and they're only showing you a nickel, the real value, those tens of thousands of dollars a year per truck, likely lands straight onto the corporation's balance sheet.
This is why the author emphatically states, and I quote, 5 cents is what you tell someone when you don't want them asking what the account holder is really getting.
It's a great quote.
I do want to push back on this slightly, just to ensure we are looking at the whole picture presented in the contracts for you listeners.
Go ahead.
The documentation mentioned in the source actually refers to something called an FCPP, a fuel cost protection program.
Ah, yes, the FCPP.
Right. So if a new driver is sitting across from a recruiter, the recruiter might point right to that page and say, look, we protect you from fuel spikes. We share the burden. It's right here in the addendum.
They probably do.
So how does that program factor into the math? Does it actually protect the driver?
The source describes the FCPP schedule as essentially a mathematical maze designed to further obscure the true economics from the driver.
Obscure it how?
Well, instead of a clear, transparent path-through of actual fuel cost, the pay addendum includes a floating add-on that is tied to a highly complex internal fuel metric chart.
A chart when your pay changes based on a value they label WRIPG minus 0.5 cents, which is then subjected to step increments, rounding rules, and unclear ceilings.
Exactly. When you introduce complex formulas, rolling averages, rounding rules, and step charts into a contract, you inherently obscure the fundamental unit economics.
Oh, I see.
On paper, to a layman, it sounds like a sophisticated safety net. But in practice, it ensures that the driver can never cleanly calculate their exact operating margins in real time.
Meanwhile, the carrier continues to control the entire fuel ecosystem, mandates where the driver buys fuel, and presumably reaps the back-end network rebates on the total volume.
It's brilliant from a corporate finance perspective, but devastating from a contractor's perspective.
The financial math is absolutely brutal, but here's the insidious part. The math we just discussed is brutal, yes, but it's not what traps you.
Right.
Math you can argue with. You can try to run tighter, budget better, or dispute a settlement. What you can't argue with is the paperwork.
Paperwork is final.
Exactly. And that's where this driver realized they weren't just in a bad financial deal. They were caught in a legal snare. Let's look at the paperwork trap.
Yeah, the most dangerous part of any complex business arrangement isn't necessarily the visible daily cost, it's the hidden liabilities.
All right.
The source document details severe, specific legal dangers hidden within the mismatched entities of their contract.
Let's get very specific about these entities for you listening.
Okay.
The driver points out that their truck lease agreement, the legally binding document obligating them to pay tens of thousands of dollars over the years for the massive physical asset named Knight Transportation, Inc. as the operating carrier.
Right.
But in reality, on a day-to-day basis, the driver was dispatched by and hauled freight for an entirely different legal entity, Knight Refrigerated, LLC.
And the complications didn't stop there.
Ah.
Their independent contractor operating agreement, known in the industry as the ICOA, had discrepancies right on its face, mixing up Inc. and LLC designations in the very text of the document.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the driver notes that they recognize this, raise the issue, and try to get it fixed during the contract term, but their concerns were ignored by management.
Furthermore, they were sometimes dispatched to haul freight for yet another affiliated carrier, Cold Trans, LLC.
Exactly, and even physically drove a truck with Cold Trans branding on the side while operating under this tangled web of agreements.
Now, if I'm listening to this, I might think, well, they all have similar names. They are clearly under the same corporate umbrella. Who cares if it says Inc. or LLC on page 4?
Right, it seems minor.
Why does that legal distinction matter out on the road?
It matters immensely because of corporate liability and legal accountability. The entire purpose of creating separate LLCs, limited liability companies, is to wall off risk.
Ah, okay.
When the contracts, the federal DOT operating authority, and the on-the-ground reality of who is directing the work do not perfectly align, accountability becomes a corporate shell game.
Meaning if something goes wrong, everyone points the finger at the other entity?
Precisely. If a driver gets into a severe accident, or if there's a major legal dispute over unpaid settlements, the opposing corporate legal team can use these mismatched entities as a shield.
They can argue in court, you filed suit against Knight Transportation, Inc., but your work was actually directed by Knight Refrigerated, LLC, therefore your claim against us is invalid.
Right. When entity structures are messy and interlocking, it is always the smaller party, the individual driver who doesn't have a team of corporate lawyers on retainer who gets squeezed in the confusion.
That shell game sets the stage for the ultimate breaking point in this driver's story. Let me narrate the reality of what happened regarding the contract timelines, what we can call the duration mismatch.
This is the part of the source material that is genuinely shocking.
Because it turns a bad deal into a financial prison.
It really does.
So in January of 2024, the driver stopped hauling freight for the carrier. Why? Because their independent contractor operating agreement, the ICOA, had a specific duration of exactly 24 months. By January 2024, those 24 months were up, the operating agreement expired, and the carrier refused to sign a new one.
And to be clear about what that means, the legal agreement that allowed the driver to haul freight, generate revenue, and legally operate under the carrier's Federal Department of Transportation authority was now dead.
They were legally prohibited from pulling a load for that company.
But the truck lease, the legal document obligating the driver to pay hundreds of dollars a week for the physical truck, had a duration of over 4 years.
Oh my God. This creates an impossible, catastrophic legal and financial scenario for the driver.
Completely. They are left holding a massive, depreciating physical asset. They are legally obligated to make a fixed weekly payment on that asset.
But because the carrier refused to renew the operating agreement, the driver has no legally compliant way to actually operate that truck to earn the money required to make the payment under the carrier's system.
It is unbelievable.
Imagine signing a 5-year mortgage on a brand new house, but the city only gives you a 2-year permit to actually live inside it.
Right.
When that 2-year permit expires, the city locks the doors. You can't go inside, you can't use the house.
But the bank still expects their massive mortgage check every single month, and you can't easily sell the house or move it to a different city because the bank holds the title.
Exactly.
And the author notes that it was not simple to just take the truck elsewhere to another carrier or to resolve the situation cleanly through direct payments to a third-party bank.
Why not?
These agreements are often designed to interlock in a way that traps the driver. The agreement that lets you work expires, but the agreement that forces you to pay continues relentlessly.
We've been talking about the cold legal structures, the corporate shell games, the brutal unit economics of diesel fuel.
Yeah.
But we have to remember there is a human being inside this machine, a person trying to make a living, trying to survive.
Absolutely.
We need to shift from the spreadsheets to the emotional and physical reality of what this actually does to a person out on the road.
The human toll is profound, and the source document does not shy away from the gritty reality of being caught in this trap.
What do they say?
The driver describes the physical and mental exhaustion of being completely broke. They were stuck thousands of miles from home, waiting for loads, watching their fixed costs drain their non-existent bank account.
Burning expensive fuel just to stay cool in the summer heat and barely moving enough miles to survive the week.
Exactly. They write that toward the end of their time with the carrier, they were literally eating ramen noodles in the cab of the truck just to survive financially.
And there's a specific phone interaction detailed in the source that is incredibly dark and really highlights the culture of this system.
Yeah, that phone call.
The driver was on a phone call with their driver manager, who was calling to check on a routine load delivery time.
And the driver, desperate, tried to use that phone call to raise the alarm one last time.
Right. They communicated that their documents were mismatched and expired, that they were mathematically underwater, and that the situation was so dire they were surviving on ramen noodles just to keep the truck fueled.
In the manager's response to hearing that their contractor was starving, the manager chuckled over the phone and said, at least cut up a hot dog or something to add to it.
Man, that comment is not just a lapse in professionalism. It is a profound illustration of the systemic disconnect inherent in the lease-purchase model.
It is. As the driver notes, that is the exact moment the situation stopped being mere business friction and became outright humiliation.
You are financially drowning. You are explicitly telling the person who controls your dispatch board and your livelihood that you are drowning.
And their response to your impending financial ruin is a joke about hot dogs.
This brings up a critical point about the professional hazards when dealing with carrier-controlled systems.
Right. A system that is built to transfer capital risk away from the corporation and onto the contractor is a system that, as the author brilliantly phrases it, runs on your downside.
Meaning the company's profit margin is explicitly buffered by the driver's financial losses.
Exactly. Therefore, the carrier's management layer views a driver's financial struggle not as a systemic failure that needs to be fixed, but as a normal, acceptable operational reality.
It's not a bug in their system, it's the core feature.
Precisely.
Which means drivers listening to this need to hear some actionable advice on maintaining professional boundaries.
Yes.
When you are in a situation where carrier management is openly dismissing your personal financial struggles or mocking your insolvency, you have to recognize that the business relationship is fundamentally, irrevocably broken.
You cannot rely on empathy from a system mathematically designed to insulate itself from your failure.
When management treats your insolvency as a punchline, you must immediately transition your strategy. The time for verbal complaints to a dispatcher is over.
The advice derived from this account is to move immediately to rigid written documentation.
Everything must be in writing.
Emails, certified letters, documented text messages. You are no longer trying to fix a relationship or negotiate better miles. You are building a paper trail in preparation for severing that relationship, protecting yourself from predatory lease terms, or, as in this specific case, pursuing legal action.
And the driver in our source material did take legal action. They drew a line in the sand, gathered their documents, and filed suit.
They did.
But unfortunately, taking that step led them straight out of the terminal trap and directly into another nightmare entirely, the legal fog bank.
Yeah, the progression from the driver's financial struggle out on the road into the stark reality of civil litigation is sobering.
The case, CV 2024-019709, was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court.
And the driver quickly learned that the legal system operates on a timeline and a set of procedural rules that are completely alien and often hostile to a normal person seeking justice.
You watch movies and you think, I was wronged, I have the fuel receipts, I have the mismatched contracts, I file a lawsuit, and a judge looks at the truth and makes it right.
If only it worked like that.
But the reality of civil litigation is entirely different. The case dragged on for months. By June of 2025, an answer and a counterclaim were filed.
But instead of moving forward to a trial where the actual facts of the lease could be heard, the case just drifted.
It drifted so far that by August of 2025, the court placed the case on a dismissal calendar.
Meaning, if action wasn't taken quickly, the court was just going to throw the whole thing out for lack of prosecution.
At this critical juncture, the driver's legal counsel presented options. Try to enter settlement talks again or pursue a default judgment because the opposing corporate side wasn't responding properly to the filings.
And the driver, knowing from experience that settlement talks with this entity had been fruitless, bravely chose to push for default.
They prepared for what was described as a mini trial on damages. They spent hours on prep calls with their attorney. They showed up ready for their day in court.
And then the court day arrives. The driver is ready to present all this math, all these mismatched entities that duration traps.
What happens?
The case dies almost immediately.
Not on the facts, not on the fuel math.
Nope, it dies on pure procedure.
The court issued a minute entry with very blunt, technical legal language. The judge ruled that there was no operative pleading upon which a default could be entered.
Let's break that down for our listeners. What does no operative pleading actually mean in this context?
Well, in civil procedure, an operative pleading is the current legally valid document that outlines the claims, like the complaint or the amended complaint.
Okay.
The judge ruled that the amended counterclaim filed by the driver's legal team did not comply with Rule 15 of the Arizona Rules of Civil Procedure.
Rule 15 governs how and when you are allowed to amend your pleadings.
Right. Because the driver's lawyer apparently failed to follow the precise technical requirements of Rule 15 when filing the amended document, the court viewed the document as legally non-existent.
Wow. Therefore, the default was denied without prejudice, simply because the procedural foundation was flawed.
And this is just infuriating to read. The judge didn't look at the fuel receipts and say, the corporation's math is fair.
No.
The judge didn't look at the mismatched Inc. and LLC entities and say, this is perfectly legal.
The judge basically said, your lawyer didn't build the correct procedural foundation according to the rule book, so the court cannot even look at the house you built on top of it.
The driver's analysis of this failure is incredibly sharp. Their lawyer apparently tried to brush off this defeat as merely a strategy disagreement, telling the driver that litigation involves positions courts disagree with.
But the veteran driver saw right through that excuse. They point out that a ruling of no operative pleading due to a Rule 15 violation is not a difference of legal opinion or strategy.
No, it is a fundamental procedural defect by the attorney. The driver's quote here is legendary. "I'm not paying tuition for Arizona civil procedure."
Ah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
It raises a vital, systemic question about how the legal system functions, particularly in disputes between massive corporations and individual contractors.
Right. If a driver has all the evidence in the world, what does this procedural failure mean for a regular person trying to seek justice against a multi-million-dollar entity?
It means that massive corporate entities use civil procedure as a toll booth.
A toll booth.
Yeah. They use the sheer complexity of the rules to turn the legal process into an incredibly expensive, exhausting war of attrition.
The actual merits of the case, the unfair lease terms, the hidden fuel money, the operational control, get buried under mountains of procedural motions, delays, and technicalities.
Exactly. The corporation has the resources to pay teams of lawyers to navigate and exploit that fog bank indefinitely.
While the independent contractor, who has already been financially ruined by the lease itself, simply runs out of money and emotional endurance to keep fighting the procedural battles.
There's a sobering reality check.
But having outlined the entire life cycle of this trap, from the glossy recruitment brochure to the terminal trap, the brutal fuel math, the mismatched paperwork, the human humiliation, and the legal fog bank, we need to pivot.
Yes, let's focus on proactive defense.
If you are listening to this, how can you evaluate these programs before you ever pick up a pen to sign a contract?
We need to adopt the persona of a veteran driver warning newcomers. Based directly on the painful lessons provided in the source material, there is a specific, non-negotiable checklist of essential questions that every driver must ask a recruiter before signing a lease purchase or independent contractor agreement.
Okay, so if a new driver is sitting across from a recruiter, what's the first red flag they need to look for?
The paperwork matching game. You have to look at the exact legal entity name on your independent contractor operating agreement and compare it to the truck lease.
Okay, comparing the names.
If the ICOA says Knight Refrigerated LLC and the lease says Knight Transportation Inc., put the pen down. Ask why they don't match.
And if they say it doesn't matter?
Walk away. They must be perfectly consistent across every single document, including your settlement statements and the federal DOT numbers on the side of the truck.
Exactly, because as we saw, that tiny discrepancy is the loophole they use to dodge liability later. It also makes me wonder about the timeline. What's the next question?
You must verify the duration of the contracts. Does the duration of the operating agreement match the duration of the truck lease?
Right, the duration mismatch.
If the ICOA allows you to work for 24 months, but the lease legally obligates you to pay for the truck for 48 months, ask explicitly, what happens on month 25?
And if they cannot give you a clear, legally binding answer about how you're supposed to pay for the truck when you are no longer contracted to drive it, walk away.
Exactly. And that leads directly to the exit strategy. Can you take the truck and haul for another carrier if things go sideways?
Are there real exit ramps in the lease? Can you make direct lease payments to a third-party bank or terminate the lease cleanly without massive penalties?
Or are you locked entirely into their specific dispatch system to make the payments?
Then you hit them with the big money question. Who controls the master fuel account?
What is the actual true wholesale discount and rebate structure the network provides to the carrier, and exactly what mathematical portion of that is passed through directly to the driver?
If they smile and say, "We give you a nickel discount," and refuse to show you the account-level rebates, walk away.
Walk away.
Yeah.
You also have to ask about the mileage. Are you paid on actual miles driven, as recorded by the odometer, or are you paid on bureau miles, tariff miles, or some software's theoretical routing?
And we need to clarify the insurance jargon that recruiters throw around, because it directly impacts your fixed costs.
Yes, they will list deductions for occupational accident insurance, physical damage, and bobtail. You need to know what you are paying for.
Physical damage covers the truck itself if you crash. Occupational accident is like workers' comp for contractors, covering you if you get hurt on the job.
Bobtail insurance, also known as non-trucking liability, covers you when you are driving the truck without a trailer attached, off the clock.
And the ELD fee pays for the federally mandated electronic logging device in the cab. You need the exact weekly cost of every single one of these items.
And the golden rule that underpins all of these questions: you must get every single answer in writing.
As the source material states perfectly, if they can't answer in writing, that's the answer.
Now, to take this defense a step further, we are going to actually build a tool. We are going to conceptually outline a realistic weekly cash flow tracker.
I love this. If you are listening to this and currently evaluating a lease program, you need to build this spreadsheet and run these numbers before you sign your name on anything.
A cash flow tracker is the only way to visualize how fixed costs will interact with volatile earnings in the real world. Let's build it mentally, step by step.
Column A is the easy but painful part, your fixed weekly deductions.
You need to pull the exact numbers from the contract. What is the weekly truck lease payment? What is the weekly occupational accident insurance, the physical damage, the bobtail insurance, the ELD device fee?
Add all of those up. That is the number you owe the company every single week before you even turn the key in the ignition.
Let's run a hypothetical and say your fixed costs total $1,200 a week.
Next, we move to column B, calculating your volatile earnings. You need to use the carrier's tiered cents per mile rate.
For example, let's average out the $1.19 to $1.55 we discussed earlier to $1.30 per mile.
But here's the trick. You must multiply that against a realistic, historic average mileage number. Do not use the recruiter's absolute best-case scenario of 3,000 miles.
No, use a conservative number like the 1,500 miles the driver actually experienced.
So 1,500 miles at an average of $1.30 a mile, that generates $1,950 in gross top-line revenue for the week.
Now, column C, fuel costs. You have to subtract the real cost of the diesel.
Take those 1,500 miles, divide by the truck's 7 miles per gallon average. That means you burned 214 gallons of fuel.
Multiply that by the retail cost of diesel at the pump, minus only the meager 5-cent discount they promised.
If retail is $4.05, you pay $4 a gallon. 214 gallons times $4 is $856 in fuel costs.
Let's look at the harsh reality of that week. You gross $1,150. You subtract $856 for fuel. You are left with $1,094.
But remember column A, your fixed deductions are $1,200.
You worked a full week, drove 1,500 miles, slept in a truck stop, and you were mathematically negative $106.
You actually owe the company money for the privilege of working for them that week.
And this brings us to the ultimate, most important calculation you can do, the break-even methodology.
How do you find the exact number of miles you must drive just to hit zero? We are going to walk you through the exact formula to find your break-even mileage.
The formula is simple but profound. You take your total fixed weekly deductions and you divide that number by the result of your average cents per mile minus your per mile fuel cost.
Let me repeat that slowly so you can write it down. Total fixed weekly deductions divided by open parenthesis average cents per mile minus per mile fuel cost, close parenthesis.
Let's plug in numbers to see how it works. Let's say your fixed deductions are $1,000 a week. Your average pay is $1.20 per mile.
Your truck gets 7 millipram and fuel costs $4.20 a gallon after your small discount. That means fuel costs you 60 cents for every mile you drive.
So your $1.20 gross pay minus 60 cents for fuel leaves you with 60 cents of net margin per mile.
So you take the $1,000 fixed deductions and divide it by that 60-cent net margin. $1,000 divided by 60 equals roughly 1,666 miles.
That 1,666 miles is your absolute break-even point. If dispatch gives you 1,665 miles, you lose money.
If dispatch gives you 1,667 miles, you make exactly 60 cents of profit for your entire week.
And the crucial takeaway here is this. If a recruiter refuses to give you the exact fixed numbers required to complete this simple formula, you must never sign the paperwork.
It is incredibly empowering to see the math laid out so plainly, isn't it? It removes the emotion. It removes the glossy sales pitch of being your own boss.
It cuts through the fog and just leaves you with the cold, hard reality of the unit economics.
Which is exactly what the author of our source document wanted to achieve by sharing their story. To provide a plain English breakdown that dispels the illusion and arms the next generation of drivers with the tools to defend themselves.
And what an incredible, eye-opening breakdown it has been. Let's summarize the core lesson we've unpacked today.
We've seen that lease-purchase agreements, specifically those that lack transparent fuel economics, that lack aligned operational incentives, and that rely on inconsistent, mismatched paperwork, are not genuine pathways to financial independence.
They act as a highly sophisticated structural mechanism. They allow the massive carrier to keep all the operational levers of control while dumping the entirety of the financial volatility squarely onto the shoulders of the individual driver.
The driver takes the capital risk, the carrier reaps the rewards of the hidden network fuel rebates, and the free standby inventory.
And when the system inevitably crushes the driver financially, the legal fog bank of civil procedure protects the corporation from accountability.
It's a heavy realization, but an incredibly important one for anyone navigating the modern gig economy, the logistics sector, or the independent contracting world.
We want to thank you for joining us on this incredibly extensive deep dive into the hidden machinery of trucking contracts.
Your time, your attention to detail, and your curiosity are what make these explorations possible.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering question based on everything we have uncovered today. It is something to mull over as you think about how large-scale modern industries operate.
Let's hear it.
If an entire multi-million-dollar sector of an industry relies on complex pay addendums, mismatched contract durations, and heavily obscured fuel rebates just to turn a profit, well, is it genuinely an opportunity for the independent contractor, or is it simply a brilliantly disguised mechanism for corporate risk transfer?
Mega carrier fuel cards are sold like a benefit. But for a lot of leased owner-operators, the real question is, who is the benefit really helping? A few cents off at the pump may sound good. Until the discount is tied to a network, the rebate comes later. The formula is hard to verify, and the fuel protection scale stops short of real-world diesel prices. That is why United Freight Haulers is putting fuel card information in front of drivers who want to compare the numbers for themselves. Do not just take the carrier's word for it. Look at the math. Look at the structure. Look at your options. Visit u-knight.org today. That is u-knight.org. Knight is spelled with a K. u-knight.org. United Freight Haulers, helping drivers ask better questions before the next fuel stop.